Participating in tonight's discussion are 5 teenage students from 5 different countries. Each of these 5 different countries has participated and benefited in different degrees from American economic aid. Let me introduce them to you now. First, Samuel Laxman Fernando from Ceylon. We call him Lucky, and Lucky's had rather a bad time explaining to Americans that Ceylon is not a part of India. Next, Gur Ben-Ari from Israel. These students talk a lot about the strange mixtures that Americans put together in their meals. We just had supper in a cafeteria, and Gur started out with roast beef garnished with frankfurters. From Germany is Sabine Specht. Sabine comes from West Berlin. She says when she went to the Metropolitan Opera, she was very proud to see that of the 6 composers listed over the stage, 4 were German. Roman Cruz Jr. from the Philippines. He's got on a pineapple fiber shirt tonight. We didn't have any costumes, so we persuaded him to wear this specialty of the Philippines. Last is Majid Tehranian, who naturally enough comes from Tehran. Now, Majid, I think you ought to explain what you meant when you said that American aid in Iran has helped communist propaganda.
Well, as long as the American aid in Iran has got the shape to just to help to that certain class of people who are they possess large lands in Iran, it doesn't prevent war in our country, and unless it just gives a chance for communist propaganda to prove its points.
Majid, could you tell us then how economic aid was handled by your officials so that only the rich were benefited? Perhaps it was mishandled.
No, I don't think so. As this is the mistake of the shape of that sort of economic aids which are offered in those eastern countries, and that is the fault of those shape which is offered by the American officials, not those countries' officials.
I think you might tell us a little bit more, Majid, just how American aid was handled in Iran. You started out by saying that it didn't help the poorer classes, it just helped the richer classes. Was that your meaning?
The American aid actually is not worked out to solve the problem of unemployment. A problem of unemployment is still existing in my country, and by the fact that the balance of the certain classes, the classes financially has been disturbed by the big salaries which has been paid by the American financial offices in Tehran to that certain class of people who have been employees of those offices.
Before Roman attacks you again, maybe we ought to go on to him and hear just briefly from each one of you what your own experiences have been in your countries with American aid.
Well, as I see it, American aid has strengthened the treasury of the Philippines so that President Magsaysay right now has some money to settle the unsettled areas and give the land to the landless free of charge, and also give them a little starting push to let them till their lands and develop it.
Tell us a little more about how Magsaysay has solved the communist problem in the Philippines, will you?
Oh, well, President Magsaysay mobilized the army efficiently so that he sent them all against the communist insurrectionists. But to those who promised to surrender and give up their arms, he promised a piece of land in the south for them to own and till. As you say, the best way to convert a communist is to make him a capitalist.
So some of the aid you've been getting from America has been used constructively then to help Magsaysay in his program. How about Germany, Sabine?
Oh, I have a very special event with economic aid. Perhaps you want to hear it. You see, I come from Berlin, and I must tell you, in 1945, and the end of the war, my mother died, and my father was still in the war, was a soldier, and we had nothing to eat. And one day we got a care packet, and I myself, I was 7 years old. I thought that those people who sent this packet must be very nice people, and therefore I see. And for instance, you can take the airlift of Berlin. The Russians wanted to occupy West Berlin. And the Americans sponsored the airlift. They brought all food that the people in Germany, in West Berlin, they are 2.5 million need over by airplane, and we know that it cost them quite a lot of money, and we are very thankful to them.
You remember the airlift then,
I
do you?
remember it,
What do you
yes.
remember most about it, besides the fact that it did bring food?
Oh, perhaps the sound of the airplanes. Every 5 minutes, one airplane arrived. It was horrible the first time, but after a while, we didn't hear it anymore. We get used to it.
How about Israel, Gur? What kind of form has American aid there taken?
All right, I must tell you, Majid, that I disagree with your point of view of American economic aid to Eastern countries, because Israel has received and still receiving American economic aid and is using it for its own great benefit. I don't know, but in Israel, for the 4 and 5 years, last years, we had observed more than 700,000 refugees from Israel, from many other countries, from the diaspora, which we call it. 200,000 of them came from the Germany Nazis camps, and 300,000 of them came from the Arab states. And of course, their standard of living and their academic standard was very low. And they came without any skill and means to Israel, and we had to feed them, to clothe them, and to shelter them. And of course, it imposed on the citizens of Israel and of the government of Israel a tenderous financial burden. And then came the American economic aid and helped us very much. So in every camp instead of every camp we had before, now we had a settlement, really, and instead of the tents that we had before, now we have fine houses for them. And our government appreciates this economic aid to Israel.
Certainly it does.
Wait a minute, Majid. Before you argue, give Laxman a chance, will you?
Well, I personally like American economic aid, but I don't like American economic aid to be attached with political strings. For instance, it is not right for the Americans who help the Asians to dictate the foreign policy of the Asians. I can quote a good example. For instance, the Red China Pact, the pact which we formed, the trade pact which we formed with Red China. And the moment we formed that pact, the .4 aid which was given to Ceylon was stopped. And I think that's pretty bad. Because economic aid means something that you give in a friendly spirit, in a spirit of a real desire to help the others. It doesn't mean that you should dictate policy to the Asians. The peace of Asia is the business of the Asians, and you must leave it to them.
You know, maybe you know that, of course you know, it means that Israel is also one of the Asian countries, and still in Israel we don't feel that by accepting the American economic aid, we can get orders from America according to what to do in the foreign policy of Israel. Because in Israel we believe that the economic aid we get is something like a mutual trade. America gives us the economic aid, and America gains security and the belief that another democracy and free and peace-seeking country is established in the Middle East.
To give an answer to Gur, I wanted to say that the fact that the American aid served to bring up the level of living is obvious to me, but that shape of American aid which is given in my country is not agreeable. For instance, in my country, none of the American yet, so far as I know, has been given in the shape of a factory to give answer to millions, thousands of people who are suffering from the problem of unemployment. People want a job to get in a factory, not just money which is given in the shape of dollars or in the shape of, for instance, lipsticks, which are imported to my country from America.
Right. I know that to Israel, America exports not lipstick, as you said, but machinery, agricultural machinery, and technical experts, so to help us raise the standard of living of the poor refugees who came to Israel. And I think there must be something mishandled by your government by maybe using the American economic aid that you got.
And also, if you want the Americans to build some factories in your country, then I think that Iran should give them some sort of a guarantee of security, just like the Philippines did. The Philippines gave any American investor in the Philippines some parity rights, which makes them immune from any nationalization bill, which Congress might eventually pass. And so American investors were attracted to the Philippines, and now many of the factories there are running smoothly. And
now you're talking about a different kind of American aid. Majid, I think, was talking about direct gifts from the government. Now you're talking about private enterprise.
Yes.
Do you want to, have we finished with the discussion of whether American direct grants of aid is a good or a bad thing? Shall we go on to private investment?
I think I want to say something on that. You see, the people in Asia are very suspicious of any type of aid from these great powers. Like a child who has been burnt once will always fear fire. After that, we sort of tend to fear or treat with suspicion any move by these great powers. And therefore, I think it would be better for the Americans who want to give us aid to give it through the United Nations, because that would sort of drive out all suspicion. I think.
Now I'm sorry for interrupting. Now we've got a third factor that we're discussing. We discussed American government gifts. Ramon brought up American private investment, and now you're bringing up American aid, not given by America, but given through the United Nations.
Yes.
Now, should we go on that point, or should we finish up the other two? Good.
Maybe I want to tell you something special for you, that you came from Ceylon. I wish I could give you a sweet gift, but maybe salt is really needed. That in Ceylon there are now some Israeli experts which came under the UN to help you in Ceylon to produce the salt.
Yes, that's right, through the United Nations. Yes.
Through the UN.
Yes, I agree.
I agree with Sam saying that the American aid should be given through the United Nations. I think it makes a more effect. And by the way, I wanted to stress upon the point he indicated here, that American aid and any other aid in Iran or any other country which has been imperialized, stricken, receives suspicion from the people, and they don't realize that, for instance, this aid is given just for strengthening the peace of the world or anything like that.
Well, I wonder why the Philippines aren't as suspicious of American aid as you are in Iran or as Laxman is in Ceylon.
well, I guess it's because the Philippines has been under the Americans for quite a number of years, and they've seen that the Americans have really no desire of establishing any colony in the Philippines. They're completely aware that the Americans are giving for the sake of helping, and not for any desire of getting anything back by means of any other, well, some sort of a financial profits or even America doesn't expect the Philippines to give up some of her political rights to the United States just in exchange for her financial aid.
But do you give any rights at all, Junior, to the private American investor to attract him to the Philippines?
Well, we did for a time, but as I said, we gave them parity rights, but the agreement has been revised so that the parity rights are now reciprocal. In other words, Filipinos receive the same rights in the United States. And I think that's a good thing. I think that the mutual cooperation between the Philippines, an eastern country, and the United States, a western country, should be emulated by the rest of the world. Here is a perfect example of mutual cooperation between countries.
I think, too, that the Americans do it first only for helping. Compare it, for instance, with that what the Russians do in East Germany. In West Germany, we get money to rebuild our factories and our houses. In East Germany, the Russians do not give any money to the people that they can rebuild. Even they take the last machines they have served. And if you, for instance, travel in Berlin, you see that in West Berlin we rebuild on all places, and you see perhaps big posters showing that we rebuild with American money. And if you go to East Germany, you see no people rebuilding, you see only still the ruins.
Haven't they done any rebuilding in East Germany?
Yes, they rebuild a bit, but not only one street, and they call the street the Stalin Street. Only they want to show something what they do in Moscow.
I think, if I may add something more to this American aid, you see, I feel that Advertising is so much in the blood of the Americans that whatever you give as charity is accompanied by a fanfare of trumpets. And I think this repels us to receive any type of aid.
Well, give us some specific examples of that before you go on to your next point.
Well, I can't give you any specific example, but I know that it's published in all the papers, and you see, the very fact that you expect something back for what you give, that is, you want us to follow your democratic system. I don't say it's bad, it's good. But if a country wants to go communist, it's her business. You can't stop her from going communist, I mean.
But you can try to stop it.
Yes, but it's not your business. I don't think it is. It's the country's business whether it wants to go communist or not.
But isn't it true, Laxman, that your prime minister who made the pact with China, the trade pact, is one of the foremost anti-communists in all Asia?
Oh yes, definitely, yes. But we, as you know, we were forced into the China trade pact. I don't want to go into the details.
But you see, there are countries who do not know the difference between that what the Russians and between that what the Americans do. And they must first see it, and then they can decide to
Yes,
what
but-
part they belong.
Yes, but don't you think that, on the other hand, if you boast about something that you have given, say you give a gift to someone, and if you boast about it, well, I don't think that would be appreciated. I think that's bad.
Well, I want to add something about economic aid. I think that why should economic aid be given is because you can't wait for hungry people to have something. What hungry people want is only food, and when they get the food, and when the poverty is abolished, and when disease and really illness is also abolished, then you can have the democracy.
That's
And,
true.
and when you have the democracy, you can have the free minds. And when
Yes.
you have the free minds, you can have people who will stick to it. And then you can really prove
Yes.
that a free world can be based only on democracies.
To come back, excuse me, you're next, but I just wanted to come back to your point, Laxman. You said you didn't want to go into the reasons why you were forced into the China Pact.
Yes.
Why not?
I thought it would take some time. All right, I will. See, we depend, our staple diet is rice. And that particular year, about 3 years back, the rice crops in Burma failed, and Burma supplied most of our rice. And also the rubber market wasn't very good for us because we depend on our exports on rubber mainly, and our revenue is derived mainly from rubber, from our rubber exports. And we couldn't import rice without exporting our rubber. And at that time, we couldn't export our rubber to America because she was developing her synthetic rubber. And America refused to buy our rubber at the world price. She offered a very low price for it. And Burma couldn't give us rice. And we were in a pretty bad state of, and well, we appealed to the United States, and still she didn't heed it. And Red China came to our rescue. She offered to buy our rubber at a very high price, higher than the world market offered us, and also to supply rice. And naturally we had to. And well, as a result, America stopped aid to us and threatened to stop a certain kind of chemical which is used for the production of rubber.
Well, maybe...
I wanted just to mention that to fight against communism in those countries who are suffering from poverty is to give financial aid in the sort of technical aid. I mean, to give factories instead of the money directly to the hand of the government. Well, due to the fact that there are lots of people who are seeking for jobs, and they can succeed to get a job in a factory or anywhere else. This is the best way, even by sending technicians or aids like that, financial aids like that, and that will certainly serve to bring up the level of living in these countries.
I think you're right, Majid. You mean industrializing.
Sure.
Is that it? Yes, that's good. Also, I think we should also get some aid in the form of slum clearance and housing and things like that. I don't know, as far as Ceylon is concerned, we need this type of help, industrialization, slum clearance and housing and all that.
But when you get this money, you can do what you want. We, for instance, we need it for rebuilding houses and factories and things like that. Can't you do what you want with your money?
Yes, why not?
And then you can do that.
Yes.
Lakshman, why is it that you are suspicious of American aid, but you are perfectly willing to go into the Colombo plan, in which you're getting aid from Britain? After all, you've suffered more from Britain than you have from America.
Yes, but we, who are members of the British Commonwealth of Nations, we have a sort of a feeling of fellowship, and we don't tend to fear each other. I don't know, because this is a mutual organization. I mean, we try to help each other without any sort of force. I mean, we don't, now, for instance, England would never try to force her type of government on us. I mean, her aid is simply as a act of goodwill. Not only England, Australia, for instance, Australia has sent us many technicians, many tractors. Then also, she has sent us nurses and doctors to help in our health services. I mean, that type of aid would be very good.
Can you outline, you said a moment ago that aid of that kind and also aid through the United Nations was what you wanted. Can you draw up a plan here, just what the ideal kind of economic aid would be? All of your countries need it in some measure.
I think the first thing would be to get representation for these countries in the United Nations.
Yes,
Because,
let's just review. How many of your countries are not represented in the United Nations?
Mine isn't.
Israel is...
Israel
yes.
is, but Germany and Ceylon among these five are not. There's
Yes.
some 21 countries that aren't
Yes.
represented. All right, what next?
And I think through the United Nations we could pool all the resources of the world. I mean, all the best effort would be by pooling all resources, and I think it would sort of show the people of Asia and other lands that here is a movement, a real effort, where all people combine themselves and then try to help each other. This spirit of fellowship and brotherhood, which is so necessary.
I agree with you, Lakshman, that through the UN is really the best economic aid without any suspicions from both sides. But I think that really the main and the first thing that must be is at least peace in between the countries which are in the same region. I'll give you one example of my country. Hadn't we have been in peace pacts with the Arab country, so we could have had their sort of commercial relationships, and they, for example, Syria can't find any market for its wheat, while Israel is really ready to buy all its wheat, and for many tourists could come to Lebanon, but being with hostile countries each with other, we can't do this. So the first thing I think is really to create peace in the region, and then to support them first of all in the economic aid.
You mean attain this peace through the United Nations?
Yes, of course,
Yes,
through the
yes,
United Nations.
That's right.
To abolish the tension between the countries which are at least in the same region.
And by the way, to make my last observation, I wanted to say that psychologically speaking, the non-repaid financial aids destroyed the self-confidence of a nation, and of course that is not the purpose of the financial aids of America. And to prevent it, I think that will be a good idea to give the aids through the United Nations.
I'm afraid we have to stop on that one, Majid. There's less disagreement now than at the beginning. I think you all have agreed that aid is necessary, but you have pointed out very dramatically that the way in which it is given is extremely important. So since there's that much agreement, let me ask you just quickly in conclusion, what you found out about America since you've been here that you are going to want to tell your own people when you go home. Is that a fair question?
Yes. Well, I think I would tell my people that the Americans here, Americans are very conscious of their democracy. They are very patriotic, and I think I can give two reasons for this. One, the geographical factor, and secondly, I think this is the most important. They believe in democracy. And
I've got to leave it there. Go ahead, Gur.
All right, as we mentioned so much money here, I'll add something in addition to money, that I really have observed that even such a great and big and rich country as America has also many troubles with money.
Before I came here, I thought that all young people in America can exactly do what they want. But I must tell you, the last 2 weeks, I was in a private school, and there I saw that they have strict rules that they have to follow too. And when I tell them...
Sorry, do you?
Well, I'll tell the Filipino students how the average American student is very, very interested in international affairs.
I'm sorry, Majid, there's not time for you. We'll get it
sorry.
next time. I'm very sorry.
I'm so sorry.
Next week at the same time, 4 other students will be here to talk about not a political question. The question is, do American children have too much freedom